In 3, 2, and 1. All right, Logan. You know what we could call this on a game day.
What could we call it?
The Take Command pregame show.
The Take Command pregame show, which is a thing now, right?
Yeah, I don't know whether we're officially calling it that, but we might as well.
Yeah.
As you and I back for pregame for another season coming up, starting the regular season. So we're just getting our warm up on now. But it's a really interesting game tonight. Commanders, Ravens, of course. Ravens riding this like 20 million game preseason winning streak. We already know they're not going to play their starters. Technically, the first game at FedEx Field of the Josh Harris era. So I'm very curious to see kind of what the fan reaction, the environment is tonight. But in terms of the actual football, I think the biggest question is obviously in a preseason game, who plays and who doesn't. And it's complicated by some injuries. Let's start defensively. I think this is a little bit easier in terms of the decision-making, a little bit simpler. I just really wouldn't play that many guys tonight. And you've got John Allen now dealing with this plantar fasciitis. This is year 4 of the system. There's a couple new pieces. If you wanted to get Forbes some reps, like fine. But ultimately, you've got a bunch of guys that know what they're doing, that have had a good camp. They're on track. And they're not going to face Lamar Jackson in the ones, nor are they even going to face Tyler Huntley because Huntley is out as well. So you're facing a third string quarterback. I don't know how much that game readiness that gives you. I'd probably just sit the defensive starters tonight if I was Rivera and Jack Del Rio.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about this game and coming up a joint practice. I think that's so important is like most teams use joint practices so they don't have to play their starters in the preseason game. And, Ron came out very early and said, Sam's going to play or the offense is going to play. We're going to play our starters kind of as a general kind of catch-all blanket term. And I thought to myself, like, that's unusual, and then for Baltimore to kind of come out and follow the script with regards to joint practice and say, hey, our starters aren't going to play. I think that should change some of the parameters for Ron in conjunction with the injuries, like you were saying. So, does the defense need to play against, whoever's playing for the quarterback, number 17? What's his name? He's been
Josh
around.
Johnson,
Josh
Johnson, played for 14 NFL teams and 3 non-NFL teams in his career.
Right. So, I don't think they need to play. I think they've shown everything they need to see. I thought that second day in Baltimore was a really good day for the defense. So ride that. You know what I'm saying? Like, you've got some good backups and, Casey Toohill, James Smith-Williams, those guys, the backup linebackers, like get some file on those guys. You need file on those guys anyway. You're trying to build the roster, specifically that starting defensive line, like who's going to be here, quite frankly, like none of those 4 guys are going to get cut. So get them out there or get them off the field, let them be healthy. And then I think a lot of guys in the back end too. Maybe you want to see Forbes for a series, maybe because he's a young guy. Maybe Forrest because he's a young guy, but like Cam, I don't need to see Cam. I don't need to see Kendall. And I think the great thing is you've got good depth. Like Benjamin St. Juste gets some work at the outside if you need him to. Again, you might feel good about him and what he's shown at the nickel spot. But I generally think like you take out – I would think a lot of those guys don't need to play. The only reason you're thinking about Sam playing is because he's a rookie. And then you kind of get into this weird like, oh, he's a rookie. The whole offense needs to play because he's the starting quarterback type thing. But –
right.
I think when you look at historically with regards to joint practices into a preseason game, most teams don't play their starters.
Right. Quickly, like 10 to 15 seconds at most on a couple of guys on defense. Should they play or not? Kind of figuring out where the line is.
Sure. Yeah.
Forbes is the most interesting one. He's a first-round pick. He's had a good camp. Would you play him at all?
I mean, I would think about it. I maybe even go ask him and be like, hey, man, do you want to do it? Like, do you feel like you need it? And I talk to the coach. If I'm Ron, obviously, and I'd be like, I talk to his position coach. It's like, where do you think he's at? And if he says he's good, I might ask Forbes, hey, do you want to play? You need to get a series. And if he's like, yeah, you get a series. If you say no series, get out of there and leave it up to the player's discretion. And again, he's probably the close. He's probably the funniest one, right? Because he's really good and because he's been good and because he's a first round pick. But I think I could see an argument for him playing. But either way, I don't think he's going to play a lot.
Yeah, no, 100%. All right. James Smith-Williams, Casey Toohill, I'm going to lump them together. Like, and F.A. Obata, like, do you play those guys because you're not playing your starters and you don't want to have your third and fourth stringers play the entire game? You don't want to put that on them, injury risk for them. You want to buy them a little bit of time? Or do you just go like, we know who these guys are too. We don't need to.
I think you could. I mean, like in a real, like, me and you having coffee, like objectively, like free from the parameters and structures of the NFL, we could be like, yeah, they don't need to play. But there's something weird about it. Like the starters aren't playing, the backups need to play. And like I've been Casey Tuhill, James Smith-Williams a lot in my career, and it's not fun, and it kind of sucks because you're like, man, I'm being exposed to injury. Like they're not even playing their good guys. Like, why am I playing? But that's part of the deal, like you need the depth on the day because, like, let's say one of those young guys gets hurt, like you were saying, like someone needs to play. So I'd almost rather play, come off the field that those young guys play. So at least I'm like warmed up and ready to go. So it's less than ideal for like those, like, David Mayo, for example. Like everyone knows David Mayo is going to make the team, but he's probably going to play the whole game, and that's sucks for him. So it's just it's one of those things with preseason that kind of makes people have like an icky feeling in their stomach. It's like, sorry, bros, you got to play. So like,
sorry, bros, you got to play.
Yeah.
If we did like quotes from the podcast as episode titles, that would be the episode title of our chat today. I think linebacker is super interesting. I wonder if they play Jamin because he's kind of been floating between starter, backup. That one's going to be interesting to watch.
He's been playing really well. Like he's been playing so well. I will say, like, to your point though, he had like one rough day in Baltimore, so maybe you let him out there for a series. Yeah. But
it's also just they've been mixing and matching him so much. True. Like I don't know exactly where he is on the depth chart. Like I'm pretty sure he's like the solidified starter, but like in what packages, and whatever. I think with James specifically, since he's been playing more of that 3 technique, giving him some game reps there could be interesting as well. He hasn't done a lot of that in his career, if any, before this year. So that's an interesting thing to watch, not just if he plays, but where he lines up tonight. Beyond that, like you get into the depth stuff, BSJ is another interesting one because he missed one of the days in Baltimore. Do you want to get him some reps? But I would say I'd probably err on the side of caution with him, especially given his injury history. I wouldn't expose him. And then everywhere down the list, like Christian Holmes, you're going to get a lot of run because Danny Johnson's hurt. Those young guys are going to be out there a lot. How conditioned are you? Hopefully for a full game because you're going to be out there quite a bit. Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here, a little Take Command pregame show style preview of tonight's game, Ravens and Commanders. All right, then the sexy discussion. What do you do on offense? So JP Finley was tweeting out earlier today that Charles Leno and Andrew Wiley, if this was a regular season game, they'd be playing, no questions. Wiley got kicked in the calf. We're not exactly sure what's up with Leno, but he came out at the end of the Baltimore practices early. Ron said at the time that was planned, but then he didn't practice the next time they were out there. So he's dealing with some kind of nick. And that becomes an issue because they wanted to play Sam Howell, as you said earlier. He's basically a rookie, second-year guy with 16 career passes. And you wanted to get him some of that experience and let him march out there as a starting quarterback for the first time at FedEx Field, feel that energy as well. So maybe it's not quite as intense on week 1 against Arizona. There's a bunch of reasons why it makes sense to play him. But with both tackles potentially banged up, I think it becomes a different question than even if just one of them, considering how steady Cornelius Lucas has been as the swing tackle. What kind of, like, how does this all impact your decision-making, and what other factors are you considering if you're Ron Rivera when it comes to Howell?
Yeah, no, I don't know what Ron's thinking but if I'm Ron, let's just do that. Let's play the hypothetical game. Yeah. Like, I probably don't play him. Like, I think he had a really good couple days up in Baltimore. I think I've seen what I need to see. I've declared him the starter. Like, is it that important? Like, to your point, like, is he going to do anything in this game that gets me to thinking that he's not going to be the starter or he doesn't deserve to play? And I think you brought up a great point there about kind of getting him ready for, week 1, the environment of week 1. But I'm also kind of like, I don't want him to get hurt. Like, there's like, how good can he look when the 2 starting tackles are not in? And it just doesn't, the juice doesn't seem worth the squeeze, in my opinion. And again, like, I understand, like, he needs to get reps. And if Fred Smoot was here, he'd be losing his mind because he's like, he needs reps. I need to see him. He needs to get between 20 and 30 reps in this game. And I get that. And I'd want him to get reps because I want him to get more opportunities in a game situation. But it's less than ideal. And I don't want him to get hurt. And I don't want to expose him in a situation where he can't be successful. So, like, why risk it if I don't have to, would be my thought. And again, Ron could start him because I think Lucas has done a really good job in camp. I think Foster, the backup right tackle, number 73, he's played minutes in the NFL. And again, like, Baltimore's not playing their starters. They do have some depth at pass rusher that might be concerning for you, but you do have some experience there. So if they went out and did it, I wouldn't be surprised. But I'm also kind of like, if it was me, I'd be like, don't worry about it. We'll figure out another way to get this this in. And, if week one's a little bit rough because of these 25 plays, then like, I don't know. I don't see that being an issue because he played week one of the preseason. So like he's already got a little bit of that going for him. So
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting, like, the formula's got a lot of factors, if you will, if you want
yeah,
to make it into a giant math equation. The backup tackles is huge, but you're also then trying to go out and compete against the twos of Baltimore. Like, you should
yeah,
smoke them because you're ones and they're twos. And so what does it really tell you? I do think there's something to getting ready for, like, everyone thinks about the risk, the risk, the risk, the risk. Like, there's also risk in not having guys play. And like, the first time they step out on the field is the regular season, and they haven't played NFL football or anything resembling it. And having that ramp up. I think quarterback is such a different thought process, though, because unlike, like, when you were blocking in a drill, like 11 on 11, whatever, like, you were as exposed as you were in the game. Like, that,
right,
obviously there's more of a recklessness that happens in the game, but generally speaking, like, it's the same stuff. The difference in a game and not a game for a quarterback is that yellow jersey. Like, Sam can't get hit in practice. He can take a shot in a preseason game from some young kid who's trying to prove himself down a corner blitz that just, or a defensive end breaks free because there's a missed assignment because you're playing two backup tackles, and your quarterback takes a shot that changes the trajectory of your season. And
sure,
that's not going to happen in practice. And so the risk, to me, like, for every other position on the field, the risk actually isn't that much more elevated than it is in practice. For quarterback, it is. For
sure.
that reason, I think I've now convinced myself that I probably wouldn't play Hal.
And I think one of your arguments, before when we were talking, was that, oh, like he needs to feel the emotion. Like he's not going to feel any more emotion in this game than he felt in that joint practice. Like that joint practice is about as hyped up and ramped up as you're going to get in any offseason. That's why people do them. That's why people have them. So I almost say, like, how was he in that environment? And to my eye, I thought he did a pretty good job of kind of handling the emotion, handling the kind of the different stuff Baltimore was throwing at him. Now, it wasn't as comprehensive as I was hoping because obviously the practice was open to the media. They were live streaming the practice. So I think Baltimore was holding a little bit close to the vest. Washington was holding a little bit close to the vest. But you're not going to show any more in this preseason game, so it doesn't really matter. So what I would say is, like, to your point, it's emotionally he's been at the highest point he's going to be able to get to this offseason, I would think. There's fights, it's competitive, it's almost live in a lot of situations, right? So yeah, I don't think he should. I don't think he needs to. Like, it just doesn't. The risk isn't worth the reward. And like you said, like specifically with quarterbacks in that yellow jersey, like you're able to mitigate a ton of risk. Like I go back to Tom Brady all the time with this, and I'm not saying Sam's Tom Brady, but Tom Brady, when he was in New England, when he was in Tampa Bay, they only did joint practices. That's all they did. So he never had to play in a preseason game, right? And so, like right now, because you're mitigating injury risk, but you're exposing them to as much of that defense as you possibly can, and you're exposing them to a very high level of competition in situational football, which is great. So I would say that with the two tackles out, because you're not only exposing him, but you're exposing like Jahan and Terry and Curtis kind of unnecessarily for a level of competition that they should dominate. And it's like, just seems like a no-win scenario if he does play. Let's say they go out and they do play, they beat the twos up pretty bad. It's like, well, they beat the twos up. Let's say the
Right.
twos for Baltimore do a good job. And it's like, oh, the offense doesn't look very good. It's a no-win. You're exposing him an injury. It's the emotion of the day. I know that's important, but it's not as important as what they got from Baltimore in the joint practices. So if I was Ron, and again, I don't know what Ron's going to do and what EB's going to do. I'm sure EB wants those guys to play, but I'd probably be like, hey, man, we'll find a different way to get this stimulus and mitigate some of this risk.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. I think from the emotional standpoint, what I might do is tell him he's starting and then be right before the game, be like, never mind. You get
Dude,
him
that would
to
hate you.
be,
Players would hate you. Why would you do that? Don't do that.
because I've heard of coaches doing this before
That's
where,
terrible. I
because you go through
no, I
the
hate those coaches. That's
pregame.
awful.
I'm just saying, like, I've heard of
I
coaches
I
doing this.
get what you're saying, but
So
it's
for
like,
the audience that doesn't, you basically have your players go through the pregame routine. Remember, this is their first game at FedEx. The fans are going to be juiced. Like, that's the emotional side of it to me, is like, fans are going to be juiced. First game of the Harris era, like all that stuff. It's going to be for a preseason game, a pretty good atmosphere. And then at the last second, you're like, hey, y'all are y'all are good. Like you went through the whole thing, got your warm up in, you went through your routine. You mentally felt what it felt like, and then we're not going to expose you to any hits.
That's like the worst thing I've ever heard in my life. No, I've heard of coaches doing that. And I've seen coaches do that, but I hate it. It's so dumb. Like if I'm going to play, let me play. If I'm not going to play, let me know. Because like that, I mean, I don't know if you've been there, but like you get in the locker room, you're there 4 hours early, you're listening to music, you got to lay your stuff out just right. And then to be like, you're not playing. It's like I went through all of this mental preparation for nothing. It's infuriating. It's really, really bothersome in my opinion. It's like, just tell me yes or no. And tell me today. Or tell me yesterday. So I don't know, like that just, I get what you're trying to do there, but I feel like that's for for what? Like for what? He's played in a preseason game. He's played the game in the NFL, albeit it was like the last game of the year last year. Like, I don't think we need to do all of this kind of psychoanalyzing of the quarterback. If you want him to play, shoot, let him play. You know what I mean? If you don't want him to play, don't worry about it. Don't mind trick the kid into whatever like try to pawn this thing up. I think I hate that as a player. I hate that. And maybe coaches like it, but coaches, if you're listening, players hate that. Don't do that. It's like, it'd be like if you had this really hard workout written out for one of your clients, like an impossible workout. And you're like, get your mind right, put yourself through the warm up. And then they go through it and they kind of get themselves to the place mentally where they need to be. And you're like, we're not going to do that. And it's like, I did all of this work to get myself there, and you're just going to pull the rug out from under me. Like, dude, if you did that to me, Craig, I might fight you right there on the spot. Like, for real.
I do not want to fight you. Two, I get what you're saying. I'm just proposing that this is something coaches do specifically in this kind of scenario because they want their players to go through that mental process and know what it feels like to get to the game and see where they are emotionally and be like, are you in a place where you actually are ready to play? And then it doesn't really matter if you do or not, because I wanted the emotional gut check. And I tend to agree with you that these are adults, and some of the psychoanalysis, psychology, faux psychology, really, that coaches do in the NFL is so dumb and so silly. And if they just treated the players like adults all the time, then you'd be a better league. But this is stuff that happens. And so
and I think also part of it though is that, like, in my exposure to Sam and in watching Sam and in like what people have told me about Sam, like when you're around the team, it's like he's very mature. So if he's very mature and he's earned that respect, like obviously there's guys like that I played with in my career that are not mature football players, and they need something else. You as a coach, you need to see something else from them. And so in those situations, I'm like, maybe that's fine. I'd still be mad, but I kind of get it a little bit more. But here's a guy who's like literally checked every kind of professional box for you over the last 6 months. So why am I going to play this like trick on him for what? Like, what am I going to glean from this? What is he going to glean from this? He's shown that the moment's not too big for him. Like, he's shown that, I think. So why mess with it? If you want him to play, have him play. I think Lucas will do a great job. I think Foster has done a great job in practice. Obviously, he's not as good as Wiley or Leno or Lucas, but he's a good football player who's got NFL experience. Like, if you want to do it, let's let it run. But if not, let's not be tricky about it. Like, he's earned that from the staff, I think.
Yeah. All right. Who actually does have something to prove tonight? Like, who are the guys that are gonna play? So obviously not ones. Although, I also do wonder, like, they can mix and match O-line, whether Sam's playing or not. Like, I'd play Sadiq tonight. I'd play Chris Paul tonight, obviously. He's technically a 2, but like, I want to see those two in game action.
And they've done a good job, but I want to see more of them.
Yeah.
Because those guys are like, O-line's a funny position. Like, you need a lot of reps and a lot of time on task. And so why not? Like, Baltimore's got great defensive line depth. Let's see how you handle it. Let's see how you look. So I totally agree with that.
Yeah. So I would want to see those guys, but beyond those two, who's got a lot to prove tonight?
I mean, this is going to sound crazy, but I do think like everybody who's going to play in this game has something to prove. Now,
sure.
I think this is important. I think I've mentioned this before, but like, I've been a part of teams where before the second preseason game started, this was when there were 4 preseason games. You could tell who was going to make the team and who wasn't going to make the team. Like there was approximately 44, 45 guys who you could tell just based on rep distribution, how guys like would get stuff and how they were treated in meetings, we're going to make the team. So I think there's probably some semblance of that here. But I think, like, for example, you mentioned Casey Toohill and James Smith-Williams. Like, I have the utmost respect for those guys. I think they're fantastic football players. I think they fill a nice need on this team. But if I'm them in their situation, which I've been in before, I just want to show the coaches, just give them one last data point saying, hey, man, like, this is why I deserve to be on the roster. And here's an opportunity for them to prove that. Now, that's a very different kind of environment than, let's say, like Ricky Stromberg, for example, who is trying to prove that he can play guard in the NFL level and deserves to be on the 53-man roster, active on game day. And what I mean by that is I think Ricky's done a great job at center. In the Baltimore practice, he did a great job at guard, right? But he's got to show me that he can be consistent with that if he's going to be that swing guard with Chris Paul on game day or whatever the situation is. So that's what I would say. Like there's a gradient to this. Like then there's a guy like Bryson Tremaine who is trying to show that he deserves to be on your practice squad and maybe a rotational guy if there's an injury at gunner. Like that's kind of where you're at with this. And everybody has, that's why these preseason games I think are so compelling to watch. I know people get bored of them, but it's literally people auditioning for work, you know? And so there's a couple guys there, Casimir Allen, like we can go through the whole roster damn near if you want. I don't know how much time we have, Craig, but
this was not intended to be a full podcast length episode of a discussion, if you will. So I think the point is well taken.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just depends on like what we're talking about. Are you talking for each individual?
Yes, absolutely.
You know, it's enormous. I think the question that I was more thinking of the framing of like for the team, right? Like, sure. Yeah, your practice squad's important, but it's not as important as a guy who's going to play snaps for you this season. So like when I think of who's important for this season, like I go to that last receiver spot. I go to the Dax Milne, Kaz Allen, you know, Marcus Kemp, like who can any of those guys separate and prove that for whatever reason they belong on the roster? To me, that's super interesting. I look at a guy like Alex Arma. Can he continue to be great in his role and prove that like, hey, this role has value and I'm the guy that gives it value? Sure. I think, you know, Curtis Hodges at tight end, like he's had a bad camp, all things considered. He's one of the few guys that I think his stock is lower now than it was. So I think, can he prove that he's worth having on this team, especially with Logan Thomas out? Like, hey, it would be really great for us if we could have another tight end we can rely on. Can you be that guy, or can one of the other tight ends step up? Like, to me, those are the kinds of guys that I'm definitely thinking about. And I think, you know, another guy on the defensive side is Quan Martin, right? He has the rough first one. How does he bounce back? Not that even if he doesn't have a great game, like I'm not writing Quan Martin off of it. I'm just curious to see, like, it's a bit more of a, hey, how much are we going to be able to trust you this year kind of thing? And a little bit, you know, do you bounce back? How do you handle it? You know, can the coaches like find the role that sets you up for success? So there's a lot, I think, from just the guys that are going to make it. Nevertheless, the perspective you gave of every player obviously has something to prove if they're out there.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. So, you know, obviously like the receiver spot, the O-line depth are just places like we mentioned that with Stromberg. I think the corner depth, the safety depth, like how's that going to shake out? You mentioned Quan. He's like a really interesting variable there because he kind of like, where does he fit? The returner, I think preseason games are, you know, talking with Santana, talking with B-Mitch, like if you're looking for a returner, like you don't know if they can do it until they do it in the preseason game. So like Casimir Allen showed some flashes last week. Dax didn't get a return, but what if Dax has some good returns this week and Kaz struggles? Like, does that shift the tide in that battle? Does that definitively say, hey, Dax is the guy for this year and Kaz is a practice squad guy? So again, like to me, there's a ton of compelling storylines. You know, Peyton Daniels like had a pretty good game against Cleveland, and I think had a pretty good.
I think you mentioned this. Not a lot of pass pro reps. So
absolutely,
like, can they throw the ball a little bit while he's in the game and see what he looks like?
I totally agree because I mean that's honestly like where he struggled. Like I think we all, you know, we knew that he was closer as a run blocking player, but can he like turn that corner? And then like KJ Henry and Andre, right? Like that to me is one of the most compelling battles because right now, if you look at it just objectively, I think Dre's a little bit ahead of KJ, and KJ's a 5th round pick. So can you sneak KJ to practice squad? Like Chris Rodriguez, can he have another physical running performance? Like all that stuff is, I think, super, super interesting, especially with those young guys. And then I think kind of to stack on, like there's a couple of veterans, I think, like Tyler Larsen had a fantastic game against Cleveland. But if you're keeping Ricky, can you keep him even though he's playing good football? Like
Right.
these are the storylines and the battles that you got to watch. And I think you got to kind of like give these guys their respect because like, you know, Tyler Larsen's like like a 7-8 year vet, and he's going to be battling for a job this year. So,
and which is crazy because he's played really well. I mean, he's 32 years old. Do you keep a guy like that around? And by the way, he's a Commander. So long history with Ron. Do you keep him around? We'll see.
And then like Montero has been absolutely crushing camp. And like if I'm him, I'm like so frustrated because I've done like literally everything I possibly can, and there's a good chance that I'll make the team, you know. And him and Lufenbaum and all those guys, like they've had good camps, really, really good camps. And so I think like again, they're kind of trying to say like, don't keep so-and-so, keep me in this situation. And again, that's another battle that I'm just like, how does that shake out? I think that battle probably favors Stromberg, Chris Paul, all those other guys, but you know, they've done a great job. So just keep an eye on that stuff. Tackle depth, another interesting one because, you know, does Foster make it? I don't think so. Is it you keep 3? I've heard people saying they want to keep 4 tackles. Like who can separate themselves? I mean, that's again, this is one of the reasons why I think this is great. You mentioned Pringle, you mentioned Kemp. Like there's a lot of depth here in certain spots, and a good football player is not going to be playing football for this team.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, you know, to swing it back to the player side, like this is open tape. Everybody watches, and especially tonight, right? It's Monday Night Football. The only show in town. Yeah. If you're a you know, a Bryson Tremaine and you go out, or a Mitchell Tinsley and you go out and have 2 touchdowns, like you might not make this team, but you might make someone else's, and the paycheck is the same.
You didn't even mention him in the receivers, but he's a guy that's been quietly having a really good in this, like some people start fast and that's great. I want the guy that's finishing strong, and he had a great camp at Baltimore. He's had a good last couple of practice. He seems to be, again, one of those guys that his professionalism, like you can just tell he's a pro from the day he comes in the building. I think it might carry him to a roster spot. And if he has a big night tonight, like to your point, like they have to keep him. And then, you know, like who's out because of that. So.
Right. 100%. All right. Full podcast recapping all of this tomorrow morning. So make sure you're subscribed to Take Command wherever it is that you get your pods. All right. Hold on. Let's, I'm going to kind of be able to cut it there for the radio.
Okay.
And then
sorry, that was long, by the way.
No, it's good. It's good stuff, and it's less show that I got to do today.
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right, that'll do it for this pregame edition of Take Command. Game tonight again. ESPN's got it. Buck Aikman, the whole deal. The new Monday Night Countdown with Scott Van Pelt hosting it, so that'll be cool. If you're watching on TV, and of course the radio show, we got all kinds of coverage leading up to the game on the Team 980. Full podcast tomorrow. Logan will go through everything. Early start time for us. We'll try to get it up in the podcast feeds as soon as possible, and then we'll recap the last practices and get you ready for the final preseason game, roster cut down day, etc., for the second pod later in the week. Anything else, Logan, before we get out of here?
No, man.
Okay, then we're done. See ya.